In ancient Rome, people didn't just watch fights. They watched law being enforced through death. 50,000 citizens cheering as a woman was locked inside a bronze bull, the fire beneath her turning screams into the roar of an animal. They called it a game, but it was record-keeping. Pain measured, scheduled, and sanctified. Every execution was theatre. Every theatre a sermon on obedience. For 4 centuries, Rome turned cruelty into ceremony and death into governance. If you value the record over the legend, stay. When the ledgers close, the bones still speak. It began not with marble, but with mourning. In 264 BCE, 3 sons stood by their father's tomb, honoring him not with prayers, but with 6 slaves ordered to fight to the death. The air filled with the smell of dung, smoke, and blood. The crowd gathered, curious, then captivated. A rite for the dead became entertainment for the living. They called it munus, duty. But that duty was no longer to the dead. It was to hierarchy. The audience learned something new that day. Power could be staged. Grief could be managed. Death could be organized. From that moment, Rome's rulers understood the equation that would sustain an empire for 600 years. Control the spectacle, and you control the soul. Soon, every noble family wanted their own blood show. Funerals turned into competitions of cruelty. The more bodies, the greater the prestige. The Senate called it piety. The merchants called it opportunity. Because each corpse meant contracts, armorers, animal traders, scribes, accountants. Rome was inventing a new kind of governance, the administration of death. By the 2nd century BCE, what began as mourning had become a business. Training schools appeared in Capua, where Lannistae, managers, bought, trained, and rented fighters to senators. Each combat had a schedule, each death an invoice. The poet Livy wrote, "From mourning it turned to spectacle. Behind every cheer was a calculation. A gladiator's death earned compensation from the host's account. Executions were reimbursed, audited, archived. Rome had mechanized violence long before it mechanized labor. And the crowds? They weren't just spectators. They were being trained. Every wound became a moral message. Every scream reminded them that law was not mercy. It was maintenance. The arena wasn't chaos. It was curriculum. When Emperor Titus later staged the bronze bull execution, the same scene that opened this story, it wasn't madness. It was the perfection of that ancient logic. He turned myth into law, ritual into record, cruelty into ceremony. To the crowd, it was divine justice. To the state, it was propaganda that worked in real time. Because once the people cheered for obedience, the empire no longer needed to demand it. So the question that will haunt this story begins here. How did Rome, the empire of law, transform violence into virtue and obedience into worship? In Act 2, we descend into the system, the logistics, the theology, the psychology that made cruelty feel like civilization. What looked like chaos in the arena was precision below. Contracts, transport routes, and feeding schedules formed an invisible empire beneath the marble seats. From North Africa came lions. From Syria, leopards. From Gaul, slaves. From Egypt, crocodiles. Each shipment recorded, taxed, and insured. A municipal ledger from Carthage lists 18 panthers delivered alive. Another from Alexandria, 2 elephants in good condition. Rome didn't improvise violence, it budgeted it. Every roar was financed, every corpse accounted for. The Lanistae managed fighters like livestock. Gladiators were branded with identification marks, insured by their owners, and reimbursed when killed. Death was not tragedy, it was transaction. The Colosseum was less a stage than a state-owned factory of obedience. And when an empire learns to count its cruelty, it stops recognizing it. The philosopher Seneca wrote, "I come home more greedy, more cruel, more inhuman, because I have been among humans." He meant the games. The midday executions, meridiani, were his education in empire. Criminals tied to stakes, while lions and bears were released. Crowds bet on which would die slower. It was not entertainment, it was curriculum. The Stoics, Rome's apostles of discipline, called it moral training. Watching a man die silently proved virtue. Flinching meant weakness. To endure horror without emotion became patriotic. Cruelty turned from vice to civic duty. Even the law learned performance. Augustus decreed that only foreigners could die in the arena. Citizens were spared. It made brutality appear just, as if legality purified the blood. Justice became theatre. Theatre became governance. When violence is codified, mercy becomes treason. Rome's obsession with perfection birthed a darker art form. Reenactments of myth performed with living bodies. They called it damnatio ad bestia, condemnation to beasts. But it was more than death. It was narrative. A prisoner dressed as Orpheus sang to animals before being torn apart by a bear. Another, fitted with wax wings, fell like Icarus, onto spears instead of sea. Women played pacify, locked in bronze cows and burned alive as bulls charged. The crowd laughed, calling it realism. Artisans built machinery to lift victims through trapdoors. Priests blessed the sand before slaughter. Pain required choreography. The empire had turned execution into theology. Every myth rewritten as warning. Rebellion ends in ridicule, disobedience in spectacle. Even women, once symbols of purity, were dragged into the sand. Under Nero and Domitian, noble women fought dwarfs and beasts for public amusement. They called them gladiatresses, female gladiators. The point was not courage, but desecration. To strip a woman of modesty before thousands was to prove that no boundary, gender, class, or sanctity stood beyond the empire's reach. Rome conquered the body the way it conquered provinces, through exposure, through spectacle, through silence. By Titus's reign, the supply chain of slaughter spanned continents. Lions trapped in Numidia were marched across the Sahara, shipped to Ostia, hauled by carts into Rome. Many died en route, of thirst, suffocation, terror. Their bones, unearthed today, tell the story of logistics more brutal than war. At the Colosseum's opening festival, 9,000 animals were killed. That's 90 a day for applause. Pliny the Elder warned that the world grows empty for our pleasures. He was right. By the 2nd century, lions vanished from North Africa, elephants disappeared from Syria, leopards from Cappadocia. Rome didn't just consume men, it consumed creation. The amphitheater was empire in miniature, every province supplying victims, every roar reaffirming dominion. The empire's propaganda was ecological, proof that even nature obeyed. When a lion devoured a prisoner, it wasn't wilderness, it was order. The spectators didn't see animals, they saw empire feeding on itself. By the time of Commodus, the logic of spectacle had reached its purest form, the emperor himself in the sand. Dressed as Hercules, Commodus entered the arena before 50,000 subjects, wielding a gilded club. He killed crippled beasts and unarmed men, declaring himself the conqueror of nature. The audience roared, not from love, but from fear. He fought 700 times, all staged, all fatal for his opponents. Senators clapped until their hands bled. Absence from a show could mean death. The emperor had become the spectacle, the state's final mirror. In Commodus, Rome revealed its last secret, that when power runs out of enemies, it devours itself. The Colosseum, once an altar to the gods, became the emperor's stage. Applause replaced prayer, law replaced mercy, and every cheer echoed the same silent truth. Cruelty, repeated long enough, becomes identity. By the late 4th century, even the crowd was tired. The beasts were fewer, the treasury empty. The sand of the Colosseum, once red, began to pale. Then, in 404 AD, at a festival for Emperor Honorius, a monk named Telemachus leapt from the stands and cried, "In the name of Christ, stop this madness!" The mob stoned him to death. But in that silence that followed, Rome heard itself for the first time. Within months, gladiatorial combat was banned. The arena, heart of empire for 6 centuries, fell quiet. Not from mercy, but exhaustion. Rome had finally conquered everything except its own appetite. The bones beneath the amphitheater tell what the poets never wrote. Skulls fractured by hammers, ribs pierced by claws, lions starved to docility. The world's greatest monument was not a symbol of civilization, but its autopsy. Even after the games ended, the system survived. In smaller forms, subtler spectacles. The Senate called them public diversions. The people called them tradition. In truth, they were anesthesia. Rome had learned a terrible efficiency. If citizens are fed and entertained, they forget to ask who rules. Bread fed the body. Spectacle fed the silence. Together, they became the empire's last religion. Historians would later call it panem et circenses, bread and circuses. But it wasn't a joke. It was statecraft. Governance replaced by hypnosis. The philosopher Ammianus wrote bitterly, "No one cares for the Republic, so long as the people have grain and the theatre." That was Rome's final formula, obedience through distraction. The empire didn't die when the barbarians came. It died when its citizens stopped caring who opened the gates. Today, tourists walk those same tunnels, touching the stone that once held cages, pulleys, chains. The air smells of dust and rust, but underneath, the record remains. Archaeologists uncover bones of men, women, beasts, etched with marks of starvation, limbs severed clean by the machinery of faith and fear. Each fracture is a line of Rome's true scripture. Law turned into theatre, theatre turned into theology, theology turned into silence. And yet, beneath that silence, something speaks. From the nameless woman inside the bronze bull, from the slaves who fought at a funeral so their masters could seem devoted, from the monk who died begging the crowd to stop. They were not heroes, they were witnesses. So, how did Rome, the empire of law, turn violence into virtue and obedience into worship? By confusing order with morality, by teaching its citizens that justice must bleed to be believed, by replacing conscience with ceremony. That is the secret written in the dust beneath the Colosseum, that cruelty repeated as ritual become and that repeated as theatre becomes belief. Every empire that forgets this truth will rebuild the arena, not from stone, but from screens. Every society that cheers without thinking lays its own foundations in sand. When the ledgers close, the bones still speak.